When did you uncover a truth that threatened to shatter your family? I never thought I'd find myself at this point, sitting here, trying to untangle a lifetime of family secrets and resentments into something coherent enough for strangers to understand, let alone offer advice on. It feels like confessing a crime I didn't commit, but one I'm inexplicably tied to, a slow-motion car crash that's been barreling towards our family for decades and has finally, spectacularly, hit. Moral knot in my stomach is tightening, pulling on every fiber of loyalty I ever felt, pitting it against a stark, undeniable truth that will shatter everything if I let it out. I'm Catherine Nelson, 60F, and for most of my life, I've been the quiet one, the one who tried to keep the peace, but peace has become a luxury we can no longer afford on what's left of the old farm. It started, as most things do around here, with the land. My great-grandparents settled this place back in the late 1800s, a sprawling 300-acre farm nestled in the heart of rural Ohio. It's not a working farm anymore, not really. The cornfields were sold off parcel by parcel over the years. The dairy operation dried up generations ago. What's left is the old farmhouse, a couple of barns leaning precariously, and about 50 acres of woods and overgrown pasture. It's beautiful in its own dilapidated way, steeped in history and the scent of damp earth and decaying timber, and it's at the center of the storm. My Aunt Clara, my mother's older sister, was the last one to live there. She was a formidable woman, sharp as a tack even into her late 80s, and she had an almost spiritual connection to that house. She never married, never had children, and she dedicated her life to caring for her ailing parents, then her younger siblings, and finally, after everyone else was gone, she became the quiet, steadfast matriarch of our extended family. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep 6 months ago, there was a collective sigh of sorrow, but also, if I'm being honest, a subtle shift in the air, a silent question hanging unspoken among us. What happens to the farm now? I suppose I was the closest to Clara. I'd spent summers there as a child, learning to bake bread and identify wildflowers. As an adult, I'd visit her weekly, bringing groceries, helping with odd jobs, sitting on her porch swing listening to her stories that sometimes hinted at old grievances, hushed secrets, and the intricate, often messy, web of family dynamics that had shaped us all. Clara never outright said much, but she had a way of looking at you, a knowing glint in her eyes that made you feel like she saw right through to the deepest parts of your soul, the parts you kept hidden even from yourself. It was during these quiet moments, sipping lukewarm tea, that she'd sometimes drop little breadcrumbs, fragments of information about the past, about who really did what, who suffered, who took advantage. I didn't realize then how vital those breadcrumbs would become. Wool reading was, as expected, a tense affair. Our family isn't huge, but it's got its share of strong personalities and underlying currents. Besides myself, there was Mark Parker, 42M, my cousin, Clara's nephew through her younger brother. Mark is a lot. He's hypercritical, always has been, quick to point out flaws, quick to dismiss others' efforts, and even quicker to assume he knows best. He's a self-proclaimed entrepreneur who's had about 5 different, revolutionary business ideas in the last decade, none of which have actually, made money. He lives about an hour away, in a McMansion he bought with a substantial inheritance from his mother, another story for another time, and he always talked about the farm as if it were a historical landmark he was personally responsible for preserving, while simultaneously griping about its upkeep. It never actually helped Clara with anything, mind you, but he had strong opinions about everything from the leaky roof to the color of her porch paint. He showed up to the reading in a suit that was a bit too tight, his face already set in that particular expression of tightly controlled expectation he wears when he thinks he's about to get something. Then there was Joyce Wright, 85F, my mother's oldest sister, Clara's younger sister. Joyce is sweet on the surface, almost sickly sweet, with a tendency to enable behavior that should have been nipped in the bud decades ago. She's always been the family peacemaker, but her version of peace involves avoiding conflict at all costs, even if it means letting major injustices slide. She's frail now, her memory a bit hazy around the edges, but her eyes still hold a sharp, intelligent light when something important clicks. She relies heavily on Mark, ever since her own husband passed, and he's taken advantage of her dependency, subtly guiding her decisions, sometimes even speaking for her. I've seen it happen countless times over the years. Joyce nods along, her face a mask of gentle agreement, while Mark dictates the narrative. My own mother, Clara's other sister, passed away 5 years ago, so it was just the 3 of us, plus the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the weariness of dealing with contentious families. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. The usual bequests came first, small sums to various charities, a few pieces of jewelry to Joyce and me, some antique furniture to a distant cousin. Then he got to the main asset, the farm. My niece, Catherine Nelson, I bequeathed the farmhouse and all 50 acres of surrounding land, including the woods and outbuildings. My wish is that Catherine will continue to live on and care for the property, preserving its legacy for future generations. The air in the room thickened instantly. My heart, which had been beating a steady rhythm of mild curiosity, suddenly leaped into my throat. I looked at Joyce, whose mouth was slightly agape, and then at Mark. His face, usually so composed, had gone a shade of mottled puce, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought I heard his teeth grind. He looked like a man who'd just been told his lottery ticket was a dud. What? Mark finally choked out, the single word dripping with disbelief and outrage. That's it just? Catherine, what about the rest of us? Mr. Henderson, unperturbed, continued, to my sister, Joyce Wright, I bequeathed the sum of $75,000. My nephew, Mark Parker, I bequeathed the sum of $25,000. He paused, looking over his glasses. The rest of the estate, after all debts and expenses, will be divided equally among the remaining named beneficiaries. Mark practically shot out of his chair. $25,000? Are you serious? The farm is worth, what, close to $1 million, maybe more, even in the state. and I get 25,000? This is an outrage. This isn't right. Joyce, ever the appeaser, put a frail hand on his arm. Now, Mark, calm down. Clara always knew what she was doing. Perhaps she had her reasons. But even her voice sounded a little strained, a little surprised by the disparity. Reasons? Mark scoffed, shaking off her hand. The only reason is that Catherine must have manipulated her, or Clara was senile. This is clearly a mistake. An old woman alone out there, easily influenced. It's textbook undue influence. He glared at me, his eyes narrowed into slits. You've been spending all that time with her, haven't you? Whispering in her ear, poisoning her against the rest of us. Especially me. I felt a cold wave wash over me. Mark, that's a ridiculous accusation. Clara was perfectly sound of mind, and I never discussed her will with her. Not once. Oh, really? He sneered. Oh, it's just a coincidence that the one person who gets the most valuable asset is the one who is conveniently around her constantly, who is always playing the dutiful niece, running her errands, making her feel indebted. My face flushed. I cared for her because she was my Aunt, Mark, not because I expected anything. And you know perfectly well how little you visited her. A phone call on Christmas, maybe. A drive-by every few years to critique her flower beds. I was busy. Retorted, I have a business to run, a family to support. Not everyone has the luxury of being a professional caregiver. Mr. Henderson intervened, his voice firm. Mr. Parker, Ms. Nelson, please. Clara's will was properly executed. She underwent a full mental competency evaluation 6 months prior to signing, and she was deemed entirely lucid and capable of making her own decisions. She was very clear about her wishes. Clear about her wishes. Mark barked a laugh, a harsh, humorless sound. Her wish was to disinherit her only living nephew from the main family asset, the asset that defines our heritage. That makes no sense. I'm the one who cares about the family name, about the legacy. I'm the one who has the financial acumen to actually restore the place, make it valuable again. Not Catherine, who probably just wants to turn it into some kind of hippie commune. I bristled. That's absurd, Mark. I've lived modestly my entire life. I've always respected the farm. Respect doesn't pay the bills, he shot back. You'll just let it rot or sell it off for parts to fund your retirement. I have no intention of selling it, I said, trying to keep my voice even though my hands were trembling slightly. I intend to live there just as Clara wished. Oh, you'll live there, will you? Mark's eyes glinted with something predatory. Well, we'll see about that. The rest of the meeting was a blur of legal jargon, and Mark's barely contained fury. Mr. Henderson explained that Mark could contest the will, but warned him it would be an uphill battle given Clara's documented competency. Mark, however, seemed undeterred. As we left the lawyer's office, he pulled Joyce aside, whispering intensely to her, occasionally glancing over at me with a look that promised war. Joyce kept nodding, her brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and concern, occasionally mumbling, "Oh dear, oh dear." The next few weeks were a descent into a special kind of hell. Mark started an email campaign, copying every single living relative, detailing his deep concerns about the will and implying in thinly veiled terms that I had taken advantage of Clara. He painted himself as the true guardian of the family legacy, the only one capable of stewarding the farm into the future, and me as a conniving opportunist. I received a few bewildered phone calls from distant cousins who'd received his emails, asking if everything was okay. I tried to explain calmly that Clara had made her wishes clear, but it felt like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a thimble. Mark's narrative was already taking hold, fueled by his usual hypercritical, almost paranoid view of the world. He was particularly good at sowing doubt, planting tiny seeds of suspicion that over time would grow into full-blown accusations. Joyce, meanwhile, became increasingly withdrawn. When I tried to talk to her, she'd just sigh and say, "Mark is very upset, dear. He feels very strongly about the farm." He seemed torn, caught between her loyalty to Clara's wishes and Mark's relentless emotional pressure. I could see the internal struggle in her eyes, a reflection of the years she'd spent avoiding any form of conflict. It was easier for her to just agree with whoever was loudest, and right now, Mark was undeniably the loudest. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, about a month after the will reading, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. Return address was Mr. Henderson's office, but the name on the letter was Mark Parker's attorney. I opened it with a knot of dread in my stomach. It was a formal notice of intent to contest the will on grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. It also stated that Mark intended to seek an injunction to prevent me from taking possession of the farm. The legal battle had officially begun. I called Mr. Henderson immediately. He sounded tired. "He's going through with it, Catherine. It's going to be messy. He's very convinced he has a case." "But he doesn't," I said, my voice rising. "Clara was perfectly lucid." "I know, Catherine, and we have the documentation to prove it. But messy doesn't mean unwinnable. It just means expensive and emotionally draining." He sighed. He's also trying to get Joyce on board as a co-plaintiff. Said something about how Clara must have forgotten her true intentions for Joyce and that he's doing this for her benefit too. Joyce? I couldn't believe it. Joyce, who always preached peace, getting involved in a lawsuit? Yes, she hasn't signed anything yet, but he's been quite persistent with her. He's claiming she's being exploited by me, even though I've done nothing of the sort. This was new. Mark wasn't just attacking me. He was trying to turn Joyce, her own sister, against Clara's clear intentions and against me. It was a vicious tactic, leveraging Joyce's fading memory and her natural tendency to avoid confrontation to secure her agreement. He was twisting the narrative, painting me as the villain, even to those closest to Clara. I decided I needed to talk to Joyce face-to-face, away from Mark's influence. I drove out to her small bungalow a few days later, a pit in my stomach. She seemed hesitant to let me in, her eyes darting nervously. "Joyce, we need to talk about this lawsuit," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle. "Mark is trying to say Clara wasn't in her right mind. You know that's not true, don't you?" She wrung her hands. "Oh dear, Mark is very upset, he says. He says you took advantage." "He's wrong, Joyce. You know Clara trusted me. We talked for hours almost every week." It was sharp as a tack. She knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted me to have the farm. Joyce looked down at her hands. "But Mark says he's trying to protect me. Says I should have had more, that Clara forgot about me." Her voice was soft, laced with a genuine sadness that tugged at my heart. It was clear Mark had been filling her head with these ideas, playing on her vulnerabilities. "Joyce, Clara gave you $75,000. That's a significant amount. He didn't forget you. She made a decision about the farm based on who she believed would care for it properly. She knew how much it meant to me, how much I loved it, just as she did." Joyce was quiet for a long moment, then she looked up, her eyes finally meeting mine, and I saw a flicker of the old Joyce, the one who saw things clearly. "She did say that, didn't she? About you being the only one who truly understood the place." She sighed, a deep, weary sound. "But Mark says there's something else, something in the past, something Clara did. He says it explains why she's being unfair." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about, Joyce? What's something else?" She hesitated, her gaze drifting towards the window, a faraway look in her eyes. "He said Clara, she wasn't always kind, not to everyone. He said there was something about the farm, a secret, something she kept hidden from him, from everyone. Something that explains why she tried to cut him out." My mind immediately flashed back to those quiet afternoons with Clara, the half-finished stories, the knowing glances. She had alluded to old family feuds, to moments of injustice, to difficult decisions made long ago. There was a particular incident she'd hinted at, a pivotal moment concerning the farm's ownership, something that had happened decades ago, involving my grandfather and his siblings, including Clara and Joyce. Clara had never fully explained it, always stopping just short of the details, her eyes clouding over. I had always assumed it was just typical family drama, perhaps a disputed boundary line or an argument over inheritance after her parents died. But Mark's words, echoing Joyce's, suddenly made the fragments Clara had given me coalesce into something more ominous. Knew something asterisk, or at least he was grasping at threads, trying to find a reason, any reason to undermine Clara's will. "What secret, Joyce?" I pressed, my voice barely a whisper. "What did Mark say?" She shook her head slowly. "He just said it was about the farm, about how it ended up with Clara when it shouldn't have. He said she played dirty. He said he has proof, and if I don't join him, he'll make sure everyone knows," he said. He said he'd expose everything. This was an ultimatum, not just from Mark to me, but from Mark to Joyce, forcing her hand, leveraging some unknown historical grievance. And the way Joyce was speaking, her genuine distress, told me Mark wasn't bluffing. He believed he had something, some dark truth from the past that would invalidate Clara's final wishes. And I, Catherine, the reluctant truth-teller, suddenly felt the weight of Clara's partial confessions settle squarely on my shoulders. I had a gnawing suspicion that I knew exactly what secret Mark was referring to, a suspicion that had been quietly festering in the back of my mind for years, ever since Clara started dropping those breadcrumbs. A secret that, if revealed, would not only destroy Clara's carefully constructed image, but also plunge our family into an even deeper abyss of recrimination and blame. But proving Clara was sound of mind might require me to expose a truth Clara had spent a lifetime trying to bury. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that if this secret came out, it wouldn't just be Mark contesting the will. It would be a complete unraveling of everything my family thought they knew about their history, about Clara, and perhaps even about each other. I was standing at a crossroads, forced to choose between defending Clara's will and potentially destroying her legacy, or letting Mark win and losing the farm forever. The silence in Joyce's living room stretched, heavy with unspoken pasts and uncertain futures, as I pondered the terrible cost of the truth. The silence in Joyce's living room stretched, heavy with unspoken pasts and uncertain futures, as I pondered the terrible cost of the truth. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The secret Mark was hinting at, the one about the farm's ownership, was something Clara had guarded fiercely. It wasn't just a matter of inheritance. It was about the very foundation of our family's narrative, a carefully constructed facade Clara had maintained for decades. If Mark truly had proof, or even enough circumstantial evidence to make it plausible, it would be devastating. Not just for Clara's memory, but for Joyce, for me, for everyone who had believed in the story Clara had allowed them to believe. "Joyce," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what exactly did Mark say about the secret? Did he give you any details?" Joyce wrung her hands, her gaze still distant. "He just said it was about how Grandpa William, Clara's father, left the farm. He said Clara, she twisted things, made sure it went to her and not to your mother or to my husband. Said she lied?" Her voice cracked on the last word. "He said he found papers, old letters, deeds, things that proved it." My mind raced. Clara had hinted at something similar, though always vaguely. She'd mentioned a time of great struggle after my great-grandparents died, when the farm was heavily mortgaged and the children were young. My grandfather William had been the eldest, shouldering the burden. Clara, as the oldest daughter, had been his confidant, helping him manage the finances. My mother and Joyce were much younger, barely teenagers at the time. What if Clara, in her fierce protectiveness of the farm, had made a decision or orchestrated a situation that, while perhaps legally sound, was morally questionable? A maneuver that secured the farm but alienated her siblings. It would explain the underlying currents of resentment I'd always sensed, the hushed tones when the topic of old family history arose. "Joyce," I said, leaning forward, "did you ever hear anything like this before? From your parents or Clara or your husband?" She shook her head slowly. "No, not explicitly, just hints, murmurs. Clara was always so private about the farm's early years after the folks passed, said it was too painful to revisit. But I remember your father, my brother-in-law, always felt like the farm should have been split equally among the siblings, not just passed down to Clara. He used to grumble about it. And my own husband, Thomas, he always said Clara was too clever for her own good when it came to business. I just thought it was sour grapes, because they didn't get a piece of it." Her eyes welled up. I always thought Clara was so honorable, so dedicated. My heart ached for Joyce. She was facing the unraveling of her perceptions of her own sister, her own family history. Joyce, if Mark has these papers and they prove what he says, it could make this whole situation much, much worse. It wouldn't just be about Clara's mental state when she wrote the will, it would be about her character, her past decisions. It could turn everyone against her memory and against the farm. But if it's true, Joyce whispered, her voice trembling, if she did take advantage, then maybe Mark is right. Maybe the farm shouldn't be yours alone. Maybe it should be divided differently. Maybe should have had more. The doubt was seeping in, eroding her loyalty to Clara's stated wishes. This was Mark's cunning. He wasn't just contesting the will, he was trying to rewrite history to invalidate Clara's entire life's work, and in doing so, justify his claim to the farm. And he was using Joyce's vulnerability, her need for clarity and reassurance, to his advantage. Joyce, I said, choosing my words carefully. Clara knew what she was doing. She knew her history, she knew what she had done and what had been done to her. And she made a choice after all these years to leave the farm to me. She told me, not in so many words, but through her actions, that she trusted me to preserve it. Perhaps this secret Mark is talking about, perhaps that's why she left it to me. Perhaps it was her way of trying to make amends, to set things right in her own mind. I was speculating, but it felt right. Clara's cryptic comments about past injustices, about setting things straight, it all pointed to this. Amends? Joyce looked at me, a flicker of comprehension in her eyes. You think she felt guilty? Maybe not guilty, but perhaps a sense of unfinished business. Of balancing the scales, I suggested. She knew the full story. And she chose me, who understood her connection to the land, who spent countless hours with her, listening, learning. She chose me, not Mark, who only saw the farm as a commodity, a symbol of status he felt entitled to. Joyce was silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on some point beyond me. Then she took a deep, shuddering breath. I don't want to get involved in a lawsuit, Catherine. It's too much. I'm too old for this. And what if Mark is right? What if he really does have proof? I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want Clara's name dragged through the mud. You can't join him, Joyce, I said, firmly but gently. If you join him, you validate his claims. You give credence to the idea that Clara was senile or that she was a manipulator. If you truly believe Clara was sound of mind and that she had her reasons, then you must stand by her will. And by me? She looked at me, her eyes clouded with apprehension. But what if the secret comes out anyway? What if Mark exposes it, regardless of what I do? And we face it, Joyce, I said, my voice gaining strength. Together. If Mark has proof of something Clara did, something she tried to hide, then it will come out eventually. But if we fight him on his asterisk terms, on his asterisk narrative, we risk losing everything. We risk losing the farm and letting him rewrite Clara's legacy entirely. Clara trusted me with the farm, and she trusted me with her stories. Maybe it's time I honored that trust by telling the whole truth, painful as it may be. The words hung in the air. I realized, in that moment, that my reluctance to expose Clara's secret was not just about protecting her image, but about protecting myself from the messy fallout from the judgment of the family. But Mark had left me no choice. If he was going to expose a partial truth, a twisted version of events, then I needed to be prepared to present the complete picture, no matter how uncomfortable. This wasn't just about the farm anymore. It was about truth and integrity and honoring the complicated, flawed woman Clara truly was. I need to go, Joyce, I said, standing up. I need to talk to Mr. Henderson. I need to prepare. And I need you to think, truly think, about what you want to do. Don't let Mark bully you into something you don't believe in. Joyce nodded slowly, still looking troubled, but I sensed a shift, a slight stiffening of her resolve. Perhaps seeing the potential destruction of Clara's memory, rather than just the personal slight against her, had finally broken through Mark's carefully constructed narrative of victimhood and entitlement. I left her bungalow with a heavy heart, but a new, grim determination. The battle was no longer just legal, it was historical, and I was going to fight for Clara's true legacy, not Mark's distorted version of it. 2 weeks later, the storm intensified. Mark, emboldened by the initiation of legal proceedings, ramped up his public relations campaign within the family. He sent another scathing email, attaching scanned images of what he claimed were irrefutable documents proving Clara's malfeasance. The images were blurry, hard to read, but they appeared to be old property records, some ledgers, and fragments of letters. He interpreted them as proof that Clara had somehow manipulated the division of my great-grandparents' estate after their deaths, securing the majority of the farm for herself, at the expense of her younger siblings, including Joyce and my mother's father. His email explicitly accused Clara of deceit and betrayal, and me of being an accomplice in maintaining a fraudulent inheritance. He reiterated his call for a fair and equitable redistribution of the farm, and for Joyce to join his suit to reclaim what is rightfully hers. The phone calls started coming in faster. My Aunt Beatrice, my mother's cousin from out of state, called, her voice laced with confusion and concern. Catherine, what is Mark talking about? These documents. Is it true? Did Clara really do something like that? I tried to explain that it was far more complex than Mark was portraying, that his interpretation was skewed, but the seeds of doubt had been sown. Some relatives, eager for drama or simply influenced by Mark's persistent narrative, seemed to believe him. Others, like Beatrice, seemed genuinely distressed, torn between their affection for Clara and the shocking claims. I spent hours with Mr. Henderson, poring over the documents Mark had submitted, comparing them to the meticulously kept records Clara had maintained. Mr. Henderson, though initially skeptical of Mark's proof, admitted the optics were bad. He's cherry-picking, Catherine. He's taking snippets out of context, using legal jargon to inflate their meaning. But the perception he's creating is dangerous. We need a counter-narrative, and we need it to be backed by solid evidence. The problem is, if this involves events from 70 years ago, finding that evidence might be difficult. I sighed. I think I know what he's referring to, Mr. Henderson. Clara hinted at it. After her parents died, the farm was in terrible financial shape. There was a drought, then a barn fire. They were heavily in debt. My grandfather William, who inherited the farm, was overwhelmed. Clara, as his eldest sister, was the only one old enough and capable enough to truly help him manage the books, deal with the banks, keep everything afloat. My mother and Joyce were still children. Clara felt an immense responsibility to keep the farm intact, to preserve it for the family. So, what happened? Mr. Henderson prompted. I began slowly, piecing together Clara's breadcrumbs with my own family knowledge, that my grandfather William was on the verge of losing the farm to foreclosure. He considered selling it off piece by piece just to pay the debts. Clara couldn't bear that. She loved that land more than anyone. I think she made a deal with him. Perhaps she bought out her siblings' nominal shares, or their potential future claim, for a pittance, perhaps even without their full understanding of the farm's future value. Maybe she saved the farm, but at a cost of familial harmony and perceived fairness. And she paid for these shares, or facilitated this transfer, using what funds? Mr. Henderson pressed. I don't know for sure, I admitted. She had a small inheritance from her grandmother, I think. Or perhaps she worked tirelessly, sacrificing her own youth and prospects, and that's how she acquired the funds. She mentioned something about earning every inch of it and making sacrifices no one would ever understand. She also once said that she took a burden off William's shoulders that no one else was willing to carry. Sounds like a legitimate, if perhaps aggressive, legal transaction from decades ago, potentially one that saved the farm, but also one that caused long-term resentment, Mr. Henderson mused. If she bought out their potential claims, even for a small sum, and even if they were young and didn't fully comprehend, it would still likely be legally binding. But it could easily be spun by Mark as fraudulent or manipulative if he's focusing only on the outcome, not the context. Exactly, I said. He's twisting it into a narrative of betrayal. He's saying Clara cheated her own siblings out of their inheritance, and he's using it to justify his claim that he is the true heir, the one who will set things right. We need to find the full, authenticated records of those transactions, Mr. Henderson declared, and we need to find evidence of the farm's financial state at the time. Foreclosure notices, mortgage documents, tax records, anything that proves the farm was truly in jeopardy. It would give context to Clara's actions. It would show that she was saving the farm, not stealing it. My stomach clenched. And if we can't find them, he looked grim, then we have to rely on character testimony, and we prepare for a very ugly trial where Mark paints Clara as a villain and you as her enabler. And Joyce's testimony, if he manages to secure her as a co-plaintiff, would be crucial. Spent the next few days in a haze of dread and determined research. I rummaged through Clara's old desk, through dusty boxes in the attic, searching for anything related to the farm's financial history from the 1930s and 40s. It was a daunting task, like looking for a needle in a haystack of half-century-old receipts, faded photographs, and endless stacks of local newspapers. Then, a surprising turn. Joyce called me, her voice clearer and firmer than I'd heard it in weeks. Thrin, she said, I've been thinking about what you said, about Clara wanting to set things right, and about Mark. He keeps calling, pushing me to sign those papers, and he's saying awful things about Clara, things that just don't feel true, even if I don't remember everything perfectly. My heart leaped. What are you going to do, Joyce? I told him I need more time, she said, a hint of defiance in her tone. I told him I wouldn't sign anything until I understood everything. And then, I thought about something. Her voice softened. Clara had a strong box, a metal box with a lock. She always kept it hidden, under the floorboards in her bedroom closet, remember? She told me once, many years ago, that it contained the true story of the farm and that if anything ever happened to her, and if anyone ever tried to twist her memory, I was to make sure you found it. She said you would know what to do with it. My breath hitched. The strong box. Clara had mentioned it to me too once fleetingly when she was very ill, but I had dismissed it as a feverish fancy. Joyce, are you sure? Positive, she said. She was very clear. Catherine will know what to do. I just forgot about it until Mark started talking about the secret. And then it clicked. This was it. The very thing Clara had foreshadowed. A moment of truth. A month had passed since Joyce's call. I drove to the farm, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Mr. Henderson had advised caution, suggesting we wait for his team to finish their deeper dive into public records. But Joyce's information, combined with the escalating pressure from Mark, had fueled a desperate urgency in me. The strong box was my last hope. The farmhouse was quiet, steeped in the scent of aged wood and dust. Went straight to Clara's bedroom, my grandmother's old room really, where Clara had slept her entire life. I remembered the loose floorboard in the back of the closet, tucked away behind a stack of old quilts. I knelt, my knees protesting, and carefully pried it up. Beneath it, nestled in the damp earth of the crawl space, was a small, tarnished metal box. It was heavy, and a rusty, antique lock secured it. I had anticipated this and brought a small set of tools. After a few minutes of careful prying, the lock groaned and gave way. Inside, stacked neatly, were bundles of yellowed papers. My heart pounded as I lifted them out. There were indeed old deeds, some marked canceled, others transferring partial ownership. There were ledgers meticulously kept detailing expenditures and income from the 1930s, filled with Clara's precise, elegant handwriting. And then there were letters, a thick bundle tied with a faded ribbon. Letters between my great-grandfather William and Clara, and then, later, between Clara and my mother, and even a few between Clara and Joyce's husband, Thomas. I read them there in the dusty closet, sunlight streaming in through the grimy window, illuminating the swirling dust motes. The story unfolded, more complex and heartbreaking than I had imagined. The farm had indeed been on the brink of collapse after my great-grandparents' deaths. Massive drought, followed by an aggressive bank, had pushed my grandfather William to despair. He was ready to sell the land off for pennies to cover the debts. It was Clara, then barely in her 20s, who stepped in. The letters revealed a desperate plan. Clara, using her modest inheritance from her grandmother and every penny she earned from odd jobs and working at the local cannery, had systematically bought out her younger siblings' potential asterisk claims to the farm. Not their current inheritance, which was negligible given the debt, but their future right to ownership. She did so with the consent of her overwhelmed father, William, who saw it as the only way to save the core homestead. The letters detailed how she approached each sibling. Joyce, still a teenager, had been given a small sum, which Clara explained was to help with her education. My mother's father, a young man eager to leave the farm for opportunities in the city, had been given enough to buy a small shop. Key was not that Clara cheated them, but that she saved the farm by taking on all the debt herself, and in exchange, she secured the ownership. Her siblings, relieved of the burden and given a small sum they valued at the time, had willingly signed away their future claims. They simply didn't foresee the farm's eventual recovery, its legacy value, or Clara's lifelong dedication to its preservation. One letter in particular stood out. It was from my grandfather William to Clara, dated 1941. "My dearest Clara," it read in a shaky hand, "you have saved this land. You have carried a burden no one else would or could. The farm is yours, truly yours, by right of sacrifice and sweat. Do not ever let anyone forget that. Let it be your legacy, and know that you did what was necessary for its survival." Another letter from my mother to Clara in the 1970s, after the farm had become more valuable. "Clara, I understand now, I truly do. Papa was overwhelmed. We were too young to understand. You made the impossible possible, and you've honored it every day since. I only wish I could have helped you more then." My mother had understood. My mother had forgiven if there was anything to forgive. I reread Clara's old ledgers. He had paid off the mortgages, meticulously recorded every cent, often going without herself. She had invested every spare penny back into the farm, into its upkeep, its future. This wasn't the story of a manipulator. It was the story of a savior, a quiet hero who made an incredibly difficult decision, one that, while perhaps leading to resentment from those who later felt shortchanged, was legally sound and ultimately kept the farm from being lost forever. Packed the box, feeling a profound shift within me. My perception of Clara, already complex, deepened. She wasn't just the quiet matriarch. She was a fierce survivor, a strategic thinker, and a woman who had made an unpopular but necessary choice to protect what she loved. And she had, in her own way, prepared me for this very moment. The breadcrumbs, the strong box, the farm itself. She had trusted me to finish her story, to defend her legacy, and to finally lay bare the truth. 6 weeks later, the day of the preliminary hearing arrived. Mr. Henderson had prepared meticulously, armed with the contents of Clara's strongbox, along with the corroborating public records his team had uncovered, records that showed the severe financial distress of the farm in the 1930s and 40s. Mark's attorney, a slick, aggressive man named Mr. Thorne, presented Mark's claims of undue influence and Clara's alleged historical deceit. He played heavily on the emotional aspect, portraying Mark as the wronged nephew, the inheritor of a family grievance, and me as the opportunistic recipient of a manipulated will. He brought up the discrepancy in the old property transfers, presenting the blurry documents Mark had emailed to the family as proof of Clara's nefarious actions. Then it was our turn. Mr. Henderson started calmly, addressing the competency issue first, presenting the doctor's reports and Clara's clear statements during the will execution. Then, he moved to the historical claims. "Your Honor," Mr. Henderson began, holding up a stack of documents from Clara's strongbox. "The plaintiff's claim of historical impropriety, of Ms. Clara Nelson cheating her siblings out of their inheritance, is not only false, but it misunderstands the context and the critical actions Ms. Clara Nelson took to save this farm from ruin." He presented the old ledgers, meticulously detailing the crippling debt and impending foreclosures. Presented the letters from my grandfather William, praising Clara's sacrifices and confirming her ownership as a rightful consequence of her efforts. He presented the documents showing Clara buying out her siblings' potential asterisk claims, not actual existing assets, in exchange for sums that, at the time, were significant and welcome to them, given the farm's dire straits. He even had a copy of my mother's letter, showing her later understanding and acceptance of Clara's actions. Miss Clara Nelson did not cheat her siblings, Mr. Henderson stated, his voice ringing with conviction. She saved the farm. She took on a monumental burden that no one else was willing to shoulder. The documents show her relentless hard work, her personal sacrifices, and her strategic, but entirely legal, actions to prevent the farm from being lost forever. She acted with the full knowledge and blessing of her father, the farm's then owner. Her siblings, including the plaintiff's mother, willingly accepted the settlements she offered, relieving them of any future financial obligation or claim to a property that, at the time, was a financial black hole. He then looked directly at Mark. The plaintiff's narrative is one of entitlement and a gross misinterpretation of history. He claims to be the true guardian of the family legacy, yet he seeks to destroy the legacy of the very woman who ensured that legacy survived at all. Mark's face, which had been a mask of smug assurance, began to crumble. Mr. Thorne looked visibly shaken, flipping through papers, clearly caught off guard by the depth of our counter-evidence. Then came the moment of truth for Joyce. Mr. Thorne, in an attempt to salvage his case, called Joyce to the stand. "Ms. Wright," he began, trying to lead her gently, "your nephew, Mark Parker, has approached you regarding this matter, correct?" Joyce, surprisingly, looked a little less frail than usual. Her gaze was steady. "Yes, he has. And he has expressed concerns that your sister Clara may have acted unfairly regarding the farm's inheritance in the past, correct?" Joyce paused. She looked from Mark, whose eyes were boring into her, to me. I gave her a small, encouraging nod. She drew a deep breath. "He did. He said Clara twisted things. He said I should have had more." "And do you believe your sister Clara acted unfairly, Ms. Wright?" Mr. Thorne pressed, a triumphant gleam in his eye. Joyce's voice was soft but clear. At first, I was confused. Mark put a lot of doubts in my mind. He kept bringing up things I'd forgot. He made me question Clara, question her intentions. But then Catherine reminded me of things, and then I saw some of the old papers Clara kept. The truth is not what Mark is saying. Mark gasped audibly. My sister Clara, Joyce continued, her voice gaining strength, she saved our farm. She bought my claim and my sister's and my brother's because the farm was dying. She used her own money she worked for, and she cleared the debts. She kept the farm whole. We were young, we didn't understand the burden or the future, but she did. She loved that farm more than anyone. And she chose Catherine to have it because Catherine understands that love. She understands the sacrifices. Joyce looked directly at Mark, a sad firmness in her eyes. Clara was not senile, Mark. She was sharp as a tack, and she made her wishes clear. You're trying to twist her memory to destroy her legacy just because you didn't get what you wanted. And that's not right. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Mark's jaw dropped. Mr. Thorne looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Joyce, the ultimate enabler, had finally, undeniably, chosen truth over convenience and loyalty to Clara's true character over Mark's manipulative narrative. It was a beautiful, unexpected moment of clarity and strength from a woman I had long underestimated. The judge's decision came a week later. The will, she ruled, was valid. Clara Nelson was deemed fully competent at the time of its execution, and the claims of undue influence were dismissed. Furthermore, the historical claims of fraud regarding the farm's past ownership were found to be without merit, demonstrably contradicted by Clara's comprehensive records and the context of the farm's financial state at the time. The judge commended Clara Nelson's foresight and dedication in preserving the family property. Mark's request for an injunction was denied, and he was informed he would be responsible for his own legal fees. The resolution wasn't instant or without lingering bitterness. Mark predictably was furious. He refused to speak to Joyce or me. He sent one last email to the family, a vitriolic rant about corrupt legal systems and conniving relatives, but it lacked the bite of his previous missives. The truth, finally laid bare, had stripped away his manufactured outrage, leaving him exposed as merely petulant and entitled. Some relatives, once swayed by his rhetoric, now offered me cautious apologies. Others, who had always stood by Clara, expressed relief. Joyce, however, underwent a profound transformation. The act of standing up to Mark, of speaking her truth, had seemed to re-energize her. She started visiting me at the farm more often, sharing old memories of Clara, not just the pleasant ones, but the challenging ones too, giving context to the strong, complex woman Clara truly was. She confessed to me, one sunny afternoon on the porch swing, I always just wanted peace, Catherine. Sometimes, true peace only comes after a good fight for what's right. Clara knew that, I'm just finally learning it. She even offered to help me sort through some of Clara's remaining papers, a testament to her newfound resolve. As for me, Catherine, I finally moved into the old farmhouse. It felt like coming home, but with a different kind of purpose. The moral knot in my stomach had loosened, replaced by a quiet sense of duty and belonging. I still saw the farm's dilapidation, the leaning barns, the overgrown pasture, but now I saw them through Clara's eyes as a testament to resilience, a monument to a lifetime of quiet sacrifice. The farm was mine, yes, but it was also Clara's and the legacy of all those who had poured their lives into it. I found myself walking the 50 acres, not just as an owner, but as a caretaker of history, a keeper of complicated truths. The past wasn't neat, and neither was my family. Facing the truth, even the painful parts, had liberated us in ways I hadn't imagined. Mark might never fully accept it, but his influence had waned. The constant conflict had quieted, replaced by the rustle of leaves in the woods, the gentle creak of the old house settling, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had honored Clara's trust, defended her legacy, and finally, after decades of unspoken truths, set things right. The farm and our family were still complex, still a work in progress, but for the first time in a long time, we were moving forward, not just drifting, towards a future built on honesty, not buried secrets.